When war erupted in Europe in 1914, the world was thrown into turmoil. The streets of European cities echoed with the sound of marching boots, and the old order was suddenly under threat. The Great War, as it would come to be known, promised to reshape nations and redraw borders. Across the Atlantic, most Americans wanted nothing to do with the conflict. Life in the United States continued much as it had, with families gathering in bustling towns and city streets filled with the promise of progress and peace. The horrors of trench warfare seemed a world away. President Woodrow Wilson, a man of ideals and intellect, promised neutrality, vowing to keep America out of the chaos abroad. He believed the nation should serve as a beacon of peace, not a participant in destruction. For nearly 3 years, the U.S. watched from the sidelines, its people torn between their diverse immigrant roots, many with family in Europe, and a deep desire to avoid the bloodshed. Newspapers carried stories of distant battles, and families anxiously followed the news, hoping America would remain untouched. But the world was changing rapidly, and America couldn't stay isolated forever. The nation's growing influence and its connections to the wider world made true neutrality impossible. The decision to enter World War I in April 1917 was not made lightly. It was the result of mounting pressures, economic interests tied to the Allies, political calculations in Washington, and a growing sense of moral responsibility to defend democracy and justice. Shocking violence at sea, like the sinking of passenger ships by German U-boats, secret plots uncovered in coded telegrams, and Wilson's vision for a new world order all played a part in shifting public opinion and government policy. This story is about how a reluctant nation, hesitant and divided, was ultimately drawn into the defining conflict of the early 20th century. It's a story of transformation, sacrifice, and the forging of a new American identity. We'll explore the economic ties that bound America to the Allies, from booming factories to bustling ports, and how these connections made neutrality increasingly difficult. We'll examine the dangers posed by German U-boats prowling the Atlantic, threatening American lives and commerce, and how these attacks fueled calls for action. We'll uncover the spy games and acts of sabotage that stoked fear and suspicion at home, as well as the headlines that gripped the nation and shaped public opinion. And we'll see how the ideals of freedom, democracy, and unity rallied a divided country, inspiring millions to support the war effort and redefine what it meant to be American. Understanding this turning point is crucial. It reshaped America's future, its society, and its place in the world. The aftermath of the war would echo for generations, influencing everything from politics to culture. The path to war was paved with provocations, calculations, and difficult choices, each step pushing the U.S. closer to the edge of global conflict. By examining these threads, we see how America was awakened to its destiny as a global power, forever changed by the crucible of World War I. Before the outbreak of World War I, America's economy was sluggish and uncertain. Factories stood idle, unemployment was high, and the nation was still recovering from a series of financial panics. The mood was cautious, with many businesses hesitant to invest or expand. But when Europe erupted into war in 1914, everything changed almost overnight. The distant conflict sent shockwaves across the Atlantic, and suddenly, the world's attention, and its needs, turned toward the United States. Britain and France desperately needed supplies: food, steel, oil, weapons, uniforms, and American factories answered the call. Assembly lines that had been quiet roared back to life, churning out munitions and goods at an unprecedented pace. Trade with the Allies soared, pulling the U.S. out of recession and into a period of remarkable prosperity. American ports bustled with activity as ships loaded with goods set sail for Europe, and workers found new opportunities in booming industries. American banks, led by the powerful financier J.P. Morgan, loaned billions of dollars to the Allies. These loans funded the purchase of war materials and kept the Allied war effort afloat. But there was a risk. If the Allies lost, those massive loans might never be repaid, threatening the stability of America's own financial system. The U.S. now had a huge financial stake in an Allied victory. American prosperity and the fate of its banks were tied to the outcome of a distant war. The British blockade of Germany kept American trade flowing almost exclusively to the Allies, making the idea of neutrality complicated and in practice nearly impossible. Officially, America claimed neutrality, but in reality, the nation's economy was firmly on the Allied side, supplying the materials and money that fueled their armies. Germany saw the US as the silent banker and supplier of its enemies, fueling resentment and suspicion that would soon have consequences. While politicians and citizens debated the ideals of neutrality and peace, money quietly pulled America closer to the conflict, shaping decisions behind closed doors. This deep financial connection didn't directly cause the declaration of war, but it set the stage for America's eventual involvement, making neutrality more of a myth than a reality. When provocations finally came, economic interests aligned with the growing idea of protecting America's massive investment overseas. The nation's fate was now intertwined with the outcome of the war. The nation's prosperity, jobs, and financial future were now tied to the fate of the Allied armies fighting in Europe. Victory for the Allies meant security for America's booming economy. America's neutrality was, in reality, an illusion, one shaped by the powerful economic engine of war. The Atlantic became a war zone, a vast expanse of water transformed into a deadly battleground where the fate of nations would be decided. Even before American troops ever set foot in Europe, the conflict was already reaching across the ocean, threatening American lives and interests. Britain's powerful blockade of Germany aimed to choke off supplies and starve the enemy into submission, but it was met with a new and terrifying threat: German U-boats or submarines prowling beneath the waves. In 1915, Germany declared the waters around Britain a war zone, launching a campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare. No ship, military or civilian, was truly safe. Suddenly, American ships and citizens found themselves at risk, their journeys across the Atlantic shadowed by the constant threat of attack. The crisis reached a horrifying peak with the sinking of the Lusitania in May 1915. Over 1,100 people lost their lives, including 128 Americans. The world was shocked by the scale of the tragedy. Outrage swept across the United States. Many demanded immediate action, but President Woodrow Wilson chose a path of diplomacy over war, insisting that Germany stop targeting innocent civilians. For a time, Germany backed down, but the tension between the two nations never truly disappeared. The threat of war lingered in the air. Another attack in 1916, this time on the Sussex, led to the Sussex Pledge. Germany promised to stop sinking ships without warning, hoping to keep America neutral a little longer. Wilson campaigned for re-election on the promise of keeping America out of war, and for a while, it seemed possible. But beneath the surface, the truce was fragile and uncertain. German leaders, desperate for victory, believed that only unrestricted submarine warfare could break the British blockade and win the war. They waited, planning for the right moment to resume their attacks. The Atlantic remained a ticking time bomb. Every voyage was a gamble, with American lives and commerce at constant risk from unseen enemies lurking below. Each new attack, each lost ship, pushed the United States closer to the brink of war, fueling anger and a growing sense of urgency. The freedom of the seas was no longer just an abstract idea, it had become a matter of national honor, pride and security, something Americans were increasingly willing to defend. With tensions at a breaking point, the stage was set for a final confrontation that would draw America fully into the Great War, forever changing the course of history. While battles raged at sea, a shadow war unfolded at home. Americans feared German spies and saboteurs, especially after the Black Tom explosion in New Jersey destroyed war supplies and killed several people. The war felt closer than ever. In January 1917, British intelligence intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, a secret German proposal to Mexico. Germany promised to help Mexico reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if it joined the war against the US. When the telegram was published, outrage swept the nation. Any lingering sympathy for Germany vanished. The idea of a German-Mexican alliance was a direct threat to American security. Combined with Germany's resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare, the telegram made war seem unavoidable. The secret war had become very real. For many Americans, this was the final straw. The US could no longer ignore the threat. President Wilson saw America as a force for good, with a duty to promote liberty and democracy. He dreamed of a world governed by law, not force, a vision embodied in his idea for a League of Nations. But to shape the peace, America had to join the fight. The Russian Revolution in 1917 removed the Tsar, making it easier for Wilson to frame the war as a battle for democracy. Now, the Allies were all democracies fighting autocratic empires. Wilson called on Americans to fight not for territory, but to make the world safe for democracy. His idealism gave the war a higher purpose and helped unify the nation. The war became a moral crusade, not just a military campaign. In 1914, most Americans supported neutrality, shaped by diverse backgrounds and a desire to avoid Europe's problems. Pacifists, socialists, and many immigrants opposed involvement. But as the war dragged on, public opinion shifted. The preparedness movement, led by figures like Theodore Roosevelt, pushed for military readiness. Wilson eventually supported a moderate buildup. The press, influenced by British propaganda, painted Germany as the villain. Stories of atrocities and U-boat attacks fueled anger. By early 1917, submarine warfare and the Zimmermann telegram tipped the balance. The anti-war movement faded as patriotism surged. War, once unthinkable, now seemed inevitable. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson addressed Congress. He laid out the reasons America could no longer remain neutral: German U-boats, broken promises, and the Zimmermann telegram. But Wilson's speech went further. He called for a fight not just for self-defense, but for peace and justice. The world must be made safe for democracy, he declared. He asked Congress to send Americans to fight for freedom's future. 4 days later, Congress voted overwhelmingly for war. The era of American neutrality was over. Wilson's words gave the war a noble purpose. The nation was united behind a global mission. America was now committed to shaping the world's future. The decision marked a turning point in U.S. history. The country braced for the sacrifices ahead. America's entry into World War I shattered its tradition of isolationism. Mobilization transformed society, factories retooled, millions were drafted, and the entire nation rallied behind the war effort. American troops, the Doughboys, arrived in Europe in 1918, tipping the balance for the Allies. When the war ended, Wilson traveled to Paris to help shape the peace. His 14 points offered a vision for a just world, though the League of Nations was ultimately rejected at home. Still, America had become a major world power, economically, militarily, and diplomatically. The old era of isolation was gone. The U.S. was now a central actor on the global stage. The war had changed America's destiny forever. America's entry into World War I was driven by a web of factors. Economic interests tied the nation's prosperity to an Allied victory. German submarine warfare threatened American lives and commerce. The Zimmermann telegram revealed a direct threat to U.S. security. Wilson's ideals gave the war a moral purpose. Public opinion, shaped by propaganda and outrage, made war possible. By April 1917, these forces converged, forever changing America's role in the world.